Okay, let's talk about late antiquity, which is the time period that starts during the decline of the Roman Empire and up until around 600, where we see the Roman Empire come to an end. The official date is 476. And the society that emerges in Western Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire in the West, one that is infused with Roman ideals, Roman government, Roman structure, Roman law to some extent, and that blends with Germanic civilization because you have various Germanic tribes or barbarian tribes, as the Romans called them. I don't think the Germans appreciated being called barbarians, but these Germanic tribes move into the Roman world and establish kingdoms. And that's going to be the society of Western Europe that emerges, in particular, one that is going to be influenced by Christianity as it emerges in the West, centered around Rome. And it's the version of Christianity that we call Roman Catholicism. Elsewhere, the Roman Empire is going to survive around the city of Constantinople. It'll be the Byzantine East or the Eastern Roman Empire, and we'll talk about that as well, because that empire lasts another 1,000 years until about 1453, when it falls to the Ottoman Turks. So let's look at the Roman Empire. Here it is, another map, show you the extent of the Roman Empire as well. It's just a massive, massive empire that manages and runs the Mediterranean world and extends well into England and into Central Europe. But one of the things going on in the 3rd century is the Roman Empire is in decline. It's being destabilized. Germans are attacking on the borders and moving in. And you had a series of barracks emperors and other emperors who basically were military leaders who ruled briefly. And so you have a period of turmoil and civil war. Now, there's going to be an individual who comes along by the name of Diocletian, and who's going to be succeeded by Constantine, who's going to try to stabilize the decline of the empire. And they do a pretty good job. They actually do a pretty good job. Diocletian himself, as an individual, decides that the Roman Empire is really too big. So one of the things he does is he divides it in half, and then divides that each half further into half. So he has sort of co-Caesars and an Augustus who helps him rule. And what we call is the rule of the 4 Caesars. Now, Diocletian himself is the overall emperor, but he has these sort of co-rulers, so that in the event he does retire, and he actually does retire, he retires to, at the end of his reign, he retires to split Croatia to grow cabbages, become a farmer, weirdly enough. He has someone when he retires to sort of move in position and to take his place. And it actually works. He stabilizes the decline of the empire. This system of where he divides the empire into 2 halves and then into 2 more halves is known as the tetrarchy. The tetrarchy. One of the divisions, by the way, they continue to divide the empire into further administrative units, appointing individuals, putting them in charge of these individual units, much like we have the United States with states. And, in Louisiana, you have parishes and parish seats. One of the divisions they have in this new system is the diocese. And that's kind of important because if you're Catholic, you know what a diocese is, the bishop's in charge. And so you see, with the decline of the Roman Empire, the Catholic Church is going to move in and take over the administrative structure of that empire. Diocletian sort of rules like an Eastern monarch, like he's godlike. He prefers to be called Dominus, which means Lord. That's something that a slave calls his master. He wants Romans to think of him that way and to kiss the ring and bow and kneel and do all that stuff. Now, one of the things Diocletian does, and you see Roman emperors who have good sense to rule, he rules from the east. He established his seat of power in Nicomedia in the Eastern Roman Empire. It's easier to defend. In the West, German barbarians, Germanic tribes are moving in. Constantine himself is going to rule from the East. In fact, one of the things Constantine does is build a new capital, and he names it after himself. How nice of him to do such a thing. Constantinople, today that is Istanbul, but it's Constantinople. It's on the ruins of an old Greek colony known as Byzantium, and that's why we call it the Byzantine East. That is where the Roman Empire is going to survive for quite some time. So there's a massive building program, including his new capital, Constantine's Polis, Constantinople, and he rules from the east, while Roman rule in the west is declining and declining and declining. What's interesting about Constantine is a religious transformation that's occurring. Now, when we look at Christianity, we find maybe 10% of Romans are Christians, if that much. What happens with Christianity, it was kind of viewed as sort of an outlaw religion, different from some of the other religions. Well, and I mentioned before that sometimes there are persecutions of Christians. One of the things Constantine does is he issues something known as the Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan, which is a royal or an imperial decree, in which he basically declares that Christianity is now a legal religion. Christians can practice freely. Don't persecute Christians. They are legal now. They can practice freely. And Constantine himself was baptized a Christian later in life, although there's some speculation that he actually honored a number of different gods. He may have been using it as sort of an insurance policy late in life. Who knows? But whatever it is, he's actually very important in Christian affairs, and he's going to convene a major conference of Christian leaders to decide a particular doctrinal issue that we'll talk about, and to help them sort of create what we call the New Testament. And with regard to religion, Constantine favored Christianity in particular because he believed that if God is all powerful, this is a God who will help him win in battle. That is, for a number of people, a number of the leaders who convert to Christianity, later those German barbarians, they're not the turn the other cheek guys. That's not the part of Christianity they embrace. One of the things, it's a very backwards and primitive age. They embrace Christianity in order to help themselves win on the battlefield and defeat their enemies. And there's a famous battle, the Battle of Milvian Bridge, where Constantine supposedly saw a vision of the cross in the sky, and he painted the cross on the shields of his soldiers. They had it painted on there, and he went off to win that battle. They won. So that's one of the reasons why Constantine supposedly favored Christianity. Now, one of the things that happens after Constantine and that really benefits the spread of Christianity is that all Roman emperors but one, and that's a guy by the name of Julian the Apostate, all Roman emperors after Constantine are Christian. And when the leaders are Christian, that facilitates the spread of Christianity. It's also going to lead to some Christians persecuting non-Christians because they are the top dogs now. In fact, the Emperor Theodosius around 380 just basically bans pagan religion, that is the Roman religion, and makes Christianity the official religion of Rome. That is, no longer is it just a legal religion, it's the official religion, and the pagan temples are closed. So here you can see what's going on with Diocletian splitting between an eastern and a western half. Here's Rome right here in Italy. German barbarians, Germanic tribes are going to be moving in to these areas and taking over. Here's the Byzantine East, Byzantium around Constantinople. This will be where the Eastern Roman Empire survives. The Roman Empire survives in the East up until 1453. It doesn't survive in that size, but it's centered around Constantinople. And there's Constantine right there, looking up to the sky. And there's a little image from the Battle of Milvian Bridge. You can see the cross up there, the importance of that. And one of the things about Christianity, there's a big dilemma there for a lot of Romans. What to do with Christianity? As I mentioned, they were persecuted. Diocletian persecuted Christians. He hated Christians. Constantine, his successor, accepts Christianity. There's a challenge there when you see sort of a new religion emerging and something unfortunate happens. Like in the case of Diocletian, with the empire in decline, he blamed the acceptance of Christianity. So he persecuted the Christians because they didn't follow the good Roman gods. Meanwhile, Constantine says, no, I'm going to use this religion as the basis of my rule and a way to defeat my opponents. And what you begin to see are more and more people, more and more Romans converting to Christianity. There's already this whole notion of Sunday being important. For the cult of Mithra, which is popular in the Roman army, Sunday is the day of rest for Mithra. There is a worship of a sun god. Sunday is the day of rest. Constantine sort of recognizes it. And you can see within Christian teaching, Sunday is absolutely important as well. So when you have some beliefs that are similar to some other religions, particularly with mystery religions or with Mithraism, and by the way, we're not sure whether Christianity has more influence on Mithraism or vice versa. We'll let scholars decide that. When you have people who already accept certain beliefs that make it easier for them to become Christian, it's going to help Christianity and spread. And when you have a leader who accepts Christianity and becomes a Christian, it's really going to spread. So Christianity begins to spread. And that's what happens in the 4th century. It spreads. And because, you just have a variety of Christians today, I think we have what, 400 different, at least 400 different Christian denominations in America. At that time, the Roman world was so spread out, you had different versions of Christianity that were taught. One of the reasons for the letters of St. Paul is to teach Christians what they're supposed to think about certain issues. And there are a number of controversies where Christians simply disagree about certain things. One of the big ones is centered around a priest by the name of Arius. It's called Arianism. It has nothing to do with the Nazis. This is about Christianity. Arianism, and what Arius says is basically that because because Jesus is created and he's the Son of God, he's not the same as God. They are distinct and separate entities. Jesus is not co-eternal with the Father. He emphasizes the human nature, human qualities of Jesus. Meanwhile, a number of other Christians decide no. In fact, Jesus is the same as God the Father. God the Son are the same. God the Holy Spirit are the same. So what Constantine does around 325 is convene a council of church leaders to decide this issue. Let's just have one belief. And what this council of church leaders does is gather a lot of Christian texts. And so this is how the New Testament comes about. And they study this issue and they condemn Arianism as a false belief, a heresy. It is a heresy. It is a false belief. And so they come up with an official belief. The official belief basically becomes what we call, or what Christians call, the Trinity, the nature of the Trinity. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, one and the same, of the same substance. And that's the basis of the Nicene Creed that is issued. Arianism is a heresy. And even though some Christians were later Arian, they're going to change. So you see, it takes a while for people to change their beliefs. They might become Christian, they might believe different things. And even today, it's just common that Christians don't always think the same way. But the church, officially, the Catholic Church with the Pope in Rome, is going to adopt the Nicene Creed, the conclusions of the Council of Nicaea, and the nature of the Trinity, and try to make sure that all Christians think the same way. And so here you have this empire here, the spread of Christianity, as you can see, and the triumph of Christianity, Nicene Christianity, not Arian Christianity. But it takes a while. Some of those Germans, when they're converted, they become Arian Christians. It's just a different religion for them. So it takes a while before, and it takes centuries for people to adopt a lot of the practices of the Christian church. They become Christian and still misbehave and practice polygamy. Even some of the Germans are going to practice incest. That's not kosher. And you'll see that German priests are married because they don't think anything's wrong with that. So it takes a while for the Christian church to impose celibacy and some other beliefs. But what you see is the growth of Christianity. Theodosius, you've got church courts that are going to be established to hear disputes. This is where church law comes into being, canon law. And you see emperors at that time are very important in church affairs. Constantine convening a council, Theodosius making it the official religion, letting the church establish its own courts. And what you begin to see is a conflict emerging between emperors and church officials. Who's ultimately in charge? That's going to be a centuries-long conflict, particularly within Catholicism, even within American history, where Joe Biden currently is our only our second Catholic president. John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic president, and there was this discussion about whether the Pope would be in charge of America because Kennedy was a Catholic, and he had to come out and say, no, the Pope is not in charge. And if you study Kennedy, he really wasn't all that good of a Catholic, but we won't get into that. Anyway, church and its leaders. We already talked about some of the development of a church hierarchy. Bishops, priests, deacons. Well, the bishops, very, very important, very powerful within their diocese. Remember, that is a division of the Roman world established by Diocletian. Well, the church is moving in and saying, we're going to put up one of our guys there, one of our guys here, and taking over that administrative structure. Remember, the emperor was once in Rome, and you still have emperors in Rome in the West. That's where the Pope is going to be. And these bishops have incredible power, not just spiritual power, but political power. They sort of help with the bread and circuses. They're involved in some of the welfare, giving out free food to the poor, and helping Roman law prevail. So the bishops are very, very powerful. And in particular, there are a number of bishops, 5 of them called patriarchal bishops, in some of the major cities like Constantinople, Jerusalem, Antioch, and of course, one in Rome. And this bishop in Rome, patriarchal bishop of Rome, is called Papa, the Pope. That's where the Pope is. he begins to assert his authority over all the other bishops and over all the church. There's a passage in the Bible which talks about Jesus talking to Peter. You are the rock upon which I will build my church. And according to this theory, this idea, this doctrine known as the Petrine doctrine relating to Peter, Christ commissioned Peter to be head of the church. Peter went to Rome, built the Church of Rome. He was the first bishop of Rome, and therefore Peter was the first pope. And so the Petrine doctrine explains why popes are head of the Catholic Church. Now, at that time, the popes are asserting that we're head of the entire Christian church, all Christians. But today we know that to just be the Pope is head of the Catholic Church. So that's why Catholics recognize the authority of the Pope. Some other bishops, not just Bishop of Rome, some other bishops are very important in establishing church teaching and establishing basic ideas that influence the development of Christianity and just doing important things for Christians. One is Bishop Ambrose of Milan. Bishop Ambrose, very interested in church and state relations. As I said, the emperor is very, very involved in church affairs. Who's ultimately superior over the church? What Ambrose says is basically the church is superior over the church. That is, church officials or the ultimate authority within the church, not to exclude emperors, but emperors are ultimate authorities in political affairs. He says, basically, he makes the comment that if there's ever a clash as to who is the ultimate authority, it's the church, because the church is God's representative on earth, and an emperor is just a political leader who comes and goes, that sort of thing. But you don't want to get emperors too mad about that. But the whole notion of who controls what, separation of church and state issues in particular. And one of the things about Ambrose and some others, we have people like Ambrose, Saint Jerome, Origen. I probably won't talk about that. Him and Saint Augustine. These are called fathers of the church, church fathers within the Catholic Church. They're called church fathers because they established some precedents and some ideas that are very important for later church teachings. So they're sort of these great figures. Church fathers like Ambrose. And he wonders about this. These are educated people. What do you do if you're educated? Because if you're educated at that time, you're getting a pagan education. You're studying Roman philosophy, Greek philosophy, Roman law. What does that have to do with salvation? There's that conflict there. You know, that's sort of a pagan education. But your goal as a Christian, according to the church, is to become a Christian so that when you die, you go to heaven. What does all this education have to do with salvation? But what these church fathers do is begin to work out the idea that it's important for Christians to educate themselves. For one thing, it's important for Christians to learn to read and write. Even if you learn to read and write through Greek and Roman classics, you are learning to read and write so you can better understand the Bible, because a number of these church fathers, they are not terribly taken with the idea of literalism in the Bible. What they say is the Bible is full of symbols and hidden meanings, and sometimes it's important for you to be educated so that you can get a better understanding. Even if that education is in Greek and Roman classics, reject the truths that they promote, accept Christianity, but educate yourself so you better understand the Bible. And speaking of the Bible, St. Jerome is a big promoter that, you know, Christians should become educated, which means you don't just study Christian teachings. In order for them to become better Christians. What St. Jerome is best known for is the Vulgate. That's a translation of the Bible into Latin. Bible from Hebrew, the Old Testament from Hebrew, and the New Testament from Greek into Latin. And that's why Latin dominates the language of the church throughout the Middle Ages. And it is a language of the educated people in the Middle Ages as well. So St. Jerome is a very important linguist. And it's a Bible that, the Vulgate is a Bible, it's the official Bible of the Catholic Church for centuries. A couple of little mistranslations here and there, but it's one that survives for quite some time. Another, and probably the most important, he's the greatest of these church fathers, St. Augustine of Hippo from North Africa. Very, very important. He's a bishop. Very well educated, had a pagan education. His mom was Christian. Mom wanted to be a Christian, but he rejected Christianity. He liked pagan thought, and he writes about this as in his autobiography, and sort of autobiography as he talks about his early life when he was a pagan until he accepts Christianity. And it's aptly titled The Confessions. So he's confessing how evil and sinful and wicked he was when he was a pagan. And then when he decided to become a Christian, all that changed. So it talks about his moral struggle, as I say. It talks about a number of different ideas. It talks about the power of predestination. So you get some basic ideas out of this. It talks about the concept of original sin. He talks about these things in his works. One of the things about the Confessions, he talks about his wicked side. There's a little passage in there where he goes on and on about these pears. He and his buddies used to go steal pears from somebody's orchard. So you steal these pears. And he asks the questions, and he's explaining, why did they steal those pears? And they stole the pears because they were evil and wicked and sinful. That is, the very act of stealing gave them a lot of pleasure. They enjoyed stealing. And that is, they enjoyed doing something immoral and sinful. And what St. Augustine says, that's the danger of sin. It's not that sin is harmful, it's that sin is fun and pleasurable, particularly pleasures of the flesh. They're sinful. Ask your advisor about all that stuff. But it's kind of interesting. He talks about that. Some things, it's an interesting book if you'd like to read about his transformation. A far more important book is City of God. One of the things that happens in Rome is German tribe destroys part of the city of Rome, and he writes the City of God in response to that. And basically he's saying there are two different cities, an earthly city that we build, the people build. And since it's an earthly city, it's not going to last. It's going to come to an end. What he says, what's the most important city is that other city, the city of God. And it is important for Christians to pay attention to the city of God. Make sure that you live according to the city of God, reject things of the flesh, and accept things of the spirit, so that you can gain salvation, because that's your goal. It doesn't matter whether a city survives or not, whether a city is destroyed. It doesn't matter whether an empire is destroyed, basically, is what he's saying. What your goal is to be saved, salvation, all of that. And there's an interesting thing in there as well, that there's a chapter in there when we talk about ideas within the church that we'll get to. There's a chapter in there called the sin that attends all sexual intercourse. This idea that one of the greatest sins is the sin of the flesh, lust. Human beings have lust, and that causes them to misbehave and do all kinds of stuff. And St. Augustine, basically, he would not be admired by a lot of women today, or at least some of his thoughts would not be allowed, because he, like St. Jerome as well, basically concludes that women are the instigators of lust in men. Pretty much all sin, which is what they're saying, comes from women. So you can see those ideas wouldn't be popular with women. They're out of fashion today. They use Eve as sort of the archetype of women. Eve deceived Adam, that sort of thing. So that's where they get that idea. But even today, if you notice, there are some deeply religious cultures in the world today where women are required to cover up. And that is cover up so that they don't show any of their flesh, so they don't inspire men to do some things. Ask your advisor about all that stuff. Anyway, Christian monasticism. One of the interesting things about Christianity is that they have monks. A lot of religions don't have monks. Buddhists have monks. Whether Buddhism is a religion or not, you can discuss that in another setting. It's philosophy, maybe a religion as well. But Christianity has monks. That is an option for people who just want to be religious every day, all of their lives, and pray. So that becomes possible within the Catholic Church and in the Greek Orthodox Church that we're talked to. What you begin to see is some of this stuff happening, colonies of monks and people running away from cities. Why? Where are you more likely to find those pears that cause us to misbehave? It's in those cities, right? We can go to the French Quarter, we can go to New Orleans. Oh my God, what's going to happen? A lot more than maybe what might happen in Thibodeau. So you move to these places, you move away from these places so you avoid any sort of distractions from you leading a spiritual life. And they go isolate themselves. Some of these people beat themselves, they just torture themselves, really weird things. And we see some of this stuff happening in Egypt. The church is not too fond of a lot of these little communities doing whatever they want. So they try to bring some order to that. And what they develop is this concept of monasticism. Monasteries and monks. That's basically what we're talking about. The key figure in that is a guy by the name of Benedict of Nursia, who writes a guidebook, The Rule of Saint Benedict. He's a saint. The Rule, so that it's a guidebook for monks. You basically have a 1-year trial period in case it doesn't work out for you. It's not for everybody. Where he talks about the important role of monks, the regular clergy, and those secular clergy who are out with people. One of the things you're going to do Monasteries are supposed to isolate themselves so they can daily engage in prayer throughout the day, but also some work. So there are different times where you pray. Half the day is devoted to prayer and Christian practices, and another half devoted to work. And so what's interesting is that the monks do some interesting work. Some of them become pretty good at brewing beer. Some of them become pretty good at farming, and they write some manuals of farming. And one of the things they do is that they study and teach. And so it's the monks who are actually going to preserve learning and have some schools around when learning dies out in the Western Roman world, or the old Western Roman world. So monasticism is pretty important. They do a lot of stuff, as you can see, in part of their work, draining swamps so you can open that up for farmland. So they're really important, these monks who sit and pray. And I mentioned this earlier, women and sexuality. As I said, women are the equal of men in terms of salvation. Women aren't going to women are not going to be allowed to become priests or bishops or any of that stuff within the Catholic Church. But women are considered equals under Christianity. Equals, their souls are the equivalent of men. But what you begin to see, and these aren't strange attitudes, it's not until the modern age where you see a lot of attitudes that suggest men and women should be treated equally and should be understood as equal. That's a very modern construction, even today around the world. If you look at it, you can see where societies exist that reduce women to second-class status, and really some that really do actually oppress women. So women's liberation is a very modern thing. And for the ideal, for women, and even men too, but especially for women, is virginity. That's the ideal, because St. Augustine and others within the church associated lust with the gravest of sins, because it's a sin of the flesh, and it causes people to do some misbehaving at times. Anyway, back to those pairs, I guess. But anyway, one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, this whole notion of lust, it's inspired by women, and they promote a life of celibacy. What you begin to see is that the stress on the family. The family should be a spiritual family, but because we do have to get married, it's best to get married, remain celibate until you're married, and within the marriage, try not to succumb to temptation too much. But if you do, you're going to have a child. That is the idea within the Catholic faith, that the only reason for sex even is within marriage and to produce children, and it should never happen at any other time or for any other reason. That's the sort of thing that you see with sexuality, and that's one of the reasons. And unfortunately, it gets tied almost exclusively to women as the instigator of those ideas within men. Now, I mentioned that there are barbarians on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. Barbarians, these are Germanic tribes. I don't think old Germans are going to get offended and say I'm, committing a microaggression or any of that stuff. But these are the people on the outskirts of the Roman Empire, on the east, but also in the west. It is an illiterate society, or not literate society. They don't write. I mean, you have some Scandinavians, Swedes up there, some of the Vikings who have some runes and stuff that they write on. But for the most part, it's not a literate society, unlike Rome, which very much is. And there are a bunch of different German barbarians. They fight each other. They flee from the Huns who invade from the east. They tend to be led by a chief, and they tend to be organized into tribes. There's a hierarchy. One of the things you have in societies all over is a hierarchy. You've got the chief, his war band, the comitatus is his war band. Those will later become the nobles. They have their own sort of system of laws. One of the things they prize is the wehrgeld, in order to reduce these blood feuds, that if one individual does some harm to another, the entire family has to avenge them. So what the Germans come up with, and also to save the lives of some of their warriors, is a wehrgeld. You come up with a price, put a price on that crime, and they have to pay. But if the price is unacceptable, the peace is gone, and there's this blood feud that actually occurs. The barbarians themselves are polytheistic, lots and gods and goddesses. Sometimes those are going to be incorporated into the Roman world. When they move into the Roman world, which they sometimes do, they assimilate into Roman ways. Romans adopt some of their gods, they adopt some of the Roman gods. And so what you begin to see, over time, these barbarians move into the Roman world. The Romans fought them for a while, then they move in. Some of them join the Roman military, and they rise in ranks in the Roman military. And so what you often see with this whole notion of immigration and assimilation that we see today, where, you know, say the grandparents came in speaking a language in America. They spoke a particular language when they immigrated to America. Then the grandkids no longer speak that language. They talk about hot dogs and hamburgers and all the other stuff that's American. That kind of happened in the Roman world, where you saw over time assimilation between barbarians and Romans. And you can see these are some of the tribes, the Ostrogoths who move in. It's the Ostrogoths who bring it into the Roman world. The Lombards, Lombardy in Italy is one of them. The Franks move into France, of all places. The Visigoths move into Spain and into North Africa. They're all over the place. And some of them are fleeing from the Huns, who are coming from the east. Britain is going to be settled by Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Angles and Saxons are the two big groups of people. I don't know if you, what is that show? The Last Kingdom or something with Uhtred, son of Uhtred or something. I don't know what it is. And the Anglo-Saxons, King Alfred of Wessex, who sort of unites that kingdom there and establishes a powerful kingdom there for a while. But later on, the Danes are going to move in. There's a lot of warfare going on in England. The Ostrogoths, I mentioned them, they're actually divided. They're two different types of Goths, and not the Goths in America that wear black and dreary. They're Germanic tribes: Visigoths, Western Goths; Ostrogoths, Eastern Goths. The Visigoths, by the way, defeat the Romans in battle in 378. Why did that happen? Some said, well, it was the acceptance of Christianity. We turned against the Roman gods, and that's why we lost. You know, that sort of idea. The Huns as well. They attack these Germans. They move in from the Byzantine Empire, even into Italy. The Pope meets with the Huns, and then Attila the Hun leaves. Probably because there may have been a plague there and there wasn't enough food or supplies, but we're not sure. It's kind of interesting that the Pope got rid of Attila, but there may have been other reasons for that going on. And it is, as I said, a Germanic tribe who moves into Italy, basically removes the last Roman emperor, just makes it official, and misspelled official there, right? That O in 476. That's the official date. But by that time, Germans had been settling throughout the Roman world, and it had already come to an end. That's just the official date where the Ostrogoths remove the Roman emperor and take over. One of the great books that talked about this, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, was Edward Gibbon. He blamed Christianity. That's not an idea that's accepted by people today. There's a lot of historians talk about very, very different things. And they also talk about the idea that Rome just transformed. It's sort of Rome in the West transformed, because the barbarian kings, they rely on Roman officials. They use Roman law at times. They use the system that the Romans created, their roads, their aqueducts. They don't always maintain them, but there's a great deal of intermarriage and assimilation that occurs. The Latin language survives. You know, a big group of Germans that we're going to talk about later are the Franks, the ones who settle in modern day France. And he starts the Merovingian dynasty. His name is Clovis. His wife was a Christian. Why did he become a Christian? He wanted to become a Christian because he thought God would help him defeat his enemies in battle. So he converted to Christianity. His wife had been hoping for him to convert. You know, wives do have some influence on their husbands, don't they? So, and the Franks are going to be important in helping to spread Christianity among other Germans. One of the things they do is they conquer Germans and they force them to become Christians. So that's one way to spread Christianity. Another way to spread Christianity is through missionary activity. Missionary activities. And there are a number of different missionaries. The most famous one that some of you may know, because Americans get to drink beer on St. Patrick's Day, was St. Patrick, who converted the Irish. Actually, St. Patrick's Day is actually an American holiday. It started with Irish immigrants here and spread back to Ireland. So they practice it now, but it came from America. I think it's kind of like, in that sense, Cinco de Mayo, which became more popular in America and later spread back to Mexico. But these missionaries are very important. Who do you go after? You go after the kings of these tribes. You go after the leaders. You convert them, their people convert. If you can't get the leader, go after the leader's wife, obviously, because women have some influence over men. And so that's the way they work. And they introduce Christianity to them, and they introduce the rituals of Christianity. New saints pop up with this. Some of these missionaries become saints. St. Patrick, for instance, and saints' days become holy days. And so there are all these things that get added to what we call Catholicism with saints and saints' days, reverence for the Virgin Mary. A lot of these ideas start in this sort of medieval world, early medieval world after the fall of Rome. Now we'll get to this. The fall of Rome in the West. Rome comes to an end, but you can see this Byzantine Empire. It extends here into Italy, into North Africa, and just a little bit of Spain right there. This is the Byzantine East, centered around Constantinople. This is that division. Constantine, who built his new capital. So while Rome ends officially in the West in 476, it survives for almost another 1,000 years, centered around Constantinople. These are mainly Greek people, but they call themselves Romans. So it's the Eastern Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire or the Byzantine East, the Roman Empire that survives in the East. And they survive by building up Constantinople, protecting it with lots of walls, triple walls to protect it. And they're going to lose some territory. I mean, they get attacked by all sorts of groups. So they do lose some territory. And we'll talk about Islamic invasions a little later on. But they protect Constantinople. One of the things they do is protect Constantinople is they have this combustible substance called Greek fire. Look at that. There's an image mounted on a ship, Greek fire. I don't know, it's like a medieval flamethrower that they use to protect Constantinople and to protect their navy. But they're protected within their walls. There's enough food there, so they survive within their walls. And what's important about the Byzantine East is that they value education much more than those Germans do in the West. And so they preserve a lot of Greek and Roman knowledge. They preserve Roman law so that you can later actually have a renaissance in the West, a rebirth of learning. A lot of these classics from the ancient world are preserved. One of the most famous emperors in the Byzantine East was a guy by the name of Justinian. If you saw where Italy was controlled by the Byzantine East in that map, I guess I can go back to that right here. This is the work of Justinian. He made an effort to reconquer the Western Roman Empire, and he does a pretty good job. It's not bad. He conquers part of it. He can't hold on to it. It's far too expensive. It's hard to control. You've got Germans all over the place who fight. The Lombards move in and defeat them and take over Italy, for instance. So that doesn't last. What actually lasts is this innovation of his. He convenes great scholars, legal scholars, to meet as a body to look at Roman law, to simplify it. The Roman legal system had been developing since, 500 BCE. It's old. Some of it's outdated. There are contradictory laws in there. And so he has a commission that studies this for years to get rid of contradictions, to clean it up, make it more efficient. And it's divided into different things like the digest, for instance. And this becomes known as the body of civil law, a collection of Roman law, the body of civil law. That is going to be the basis later on when we look to kings in Western Europe, outside of England, who want to establish a legal system to extend their control over people. They adopt these Roman laws. It's neat and tidy and preserved by Justinian in the body of civil law. So it becomes the basis of a number of legal systems. If you go to law school in Louisiana, you study the Napoleonic Code because Napoleon wrote a law code, or at least he had people write a law code for France. And what they did was go back and copy entire sections of the body of civil law. So you're studying the body of civil law in law school in Louisiana. And one of the things that happens also in the Byzantine East is that Christianity is going to develop differently there. It's Orthodox Christianity, the Orthodox Church led by a patriarch, although the emperor has great power over the church. Today we call it Greek Orthodox Christianity. It's going to spread into Russia by their own missionaries like Cyril, who comes up with the Cyrillic alphabet, that sort of Russian alphabet they use, a weird thing, They spread it, and it's the Russian Orthodox Church today, and they're still the Greek Orthodox Church. It's not terribly dissimilar to Catholicism. No pope, but a patriarch. It's very ritualistic. They're different sort of, they don't revere, Catholics revere Mary a little more. They're on a different calendar as well, Greek Orthodox calendar. So there's different dates for Easter, for instance. But it is a church that spreads into Eastern Europe, Greek Orthodox Christianity, have their own monasteries, and it splits away from the Roman world. The Roman world is going to try, the Roman Catholic Church is going to try to take control over it, but it's never successful in doing that. So that is one of the different versions of Christianity that emerges early on and survives. And there is what it was once a great church in Constantinople, the Church of Santa Sophia, the Hagia Sophia, Church of Holy Wisdom. It is now a mosque because Constantinople is, well, it was a museum and a mosque because Constantinople was conquered by the Ottoman Turks, a Muslim civilization. And we'll stop there.